Hi, and welcome back to Reddit Whispers. My name is David, and I need to tell you about the night that destroyed my life. Not in some dramatic, movie-like way, but slowly, methodically, like watching a house burn down from the inside out. It's been 3 years since it happened, and I'm finally ready to share what really went down that October evening in 2021. I was 32 then, living in Portland, working as a software engineer for a mid-sized tech company. Nothing fancy, but I was good at what I did. I had a decent apartment in the Pearl District, a reliable Honda Civic, and what I thought was a pretty solid life. I wasn't rich, but I was comfortable. I paid my bills on time, had a small savings account, and even managed to send my mom a few $100s every month to help with her medications. The thing about being single at 32 is that you start to notice patterns. You see couples everywhere, holding hands at coffee shops, arguing about Netflix shows, splitting grocery bills. I'd been through a few relationships, nothing too serious, and I was okay with that. I liked my routine. Gym at 6 a.m., work by 8, home by 7, weekend hiking trips to Mount Hood. Simple, predictable, mine. That Tuesday started like any other. I remember because I had just finished debugging a particularly nasty piece of code that had been bothering me for weeks. The kind of problem that keeps you up at night, running through possibilities in your head. When I finally cracked it around 6:30, I felt that familiar rush of satisfaction. My coworker Jake clapped me on the back and suggested we grab a beer to celebrate, but I declined. I had plans to hit the gym, then maybe catch up on some reading. I left the office feeling good about myself. The October air was crisp, that perfect Portland fall weather where you can smell the changing leaves and feel winter approaching, but it's not quite cold enough for a jacket. I decided to walk home instead of taking the bus, maybe grab some Thai food on the way. I was thinking about whether to get pad Thai or green curry when I heard her scream. It was around 8:15 p.m., and I was walking down a relatively quiet side street, one of those tree-lined residential areas where young professionals rent converted apartments in old Victorian houses. The scream came from an alley between two buildings, maybe 50 feet ahead of me. Not a playful scream, not someone fooling around. This was pure terror, the kind of sound that makes your blood freeze and your body move before your brain catches up.
I didn't hesitate. I know some people would have called 911 and waited, maybe crossed the street to avoid getting involved, but I couldn't. Maybe it was how my father raised me, always telling me to stand up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. Maybe it was just instinct. Either way, I found myself running toward that alley before I had time to think about what I might find there. The alley was narrow and poorly lit, lined with dumpsters and fire escapes. At first, I couldn't see anything, but then I heard struggling, heavy breathing, and what sounded like fabric tearing. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I saw them about halfway down the alley. A man, tall and heavy-set, had a woman pinned against the brick wall. Her blouse was torn, and even in the darkness, I could see her face was streaked with tears and mascara. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice echoing off the narrow walls. "Get away from her!" The man's head snapped around. He was maybe in his 40s, wearing a dark jacket and jeans. For a moment, he looked startled, like he couldn't believe someone had actually showed up. Then his expression shifted to something ugly and aggressive. "Mind your own business," he snarled, but he loosened his grip on the woman slightly. That's when she looked at me. Even in that dim light, even with her face streaked with tears and terror, I could see she was beautiful. Auburn hair disheveled, green eyes wide with fear. But there was something else there too, a desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, someone was going to help her. "Please," she whispered, and that single word cut right through me. I'm not a big guy, 5'10", maybe 170 soaking wet. I go to the gym regularly, but I'm built more like a distance runner than a linebacker. This guy had at least 50 pounds on me and looked like he'd been in his share of fights. But sometimes you don't get to choose your moments. Sometimes they choose you. I said, "Get away from her," I repeated, pulling out my phone. "I'm calling the police right now." He laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "You think you're some kind of hero, skinny boy? You think you're gonna save the day?" What happened next took maybe 30 seconds, but it felt like slow motion. He shoved the woman aside. She stumbled and fell against a dumpster and started walking toward me.
I had 911 dialed and was about to hit call when he rushed me. I managed to sidestep his first swing, but the second one caught me in the ribs. The pain was immediate and sharp, but adrenaline is a hell of a drug. I swung back, catching him somewhere around his jaw. My knuckles exploded with pain, but he staggered backward. "Run!" I yelled to the woman. "Get out of here!" But she didn't run. She just stood there, pressed against the wall, watching us with those wide green eyes. The fight didn't last long. The guy was bigger than me, but he was also drunk or high or both. His movements were sloppy, and when he charged me again, I managed to trip him. He went down hard, his head connecting with the concrete with a sickening thud. For a moment, everything was quiet except for our heavy breathing. Then the woman started crying, not the panic sobs from before, but something deeper, more broken. "Are you okay?" I asked, moving toward her carefully. I didn't want to scare her any more than she already was. She nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. Her blouse was torn down the front, and I could see bruises forming on her arms where he'd grabbed her. "Did he hurt you? Do you need medical attention?" "I don't know," she said, and her voice was so small, so fragile. "I don't think so. I mean, not badly. He didn't get that far." I looked back at the guy on the ground. He was unconscious but breathing. Blood was pooling under his head where it had hit the concrete. "We need to call the police," I said, finally hitting the call button on my phone. "911, what's your emergency?" "I just stopped an assault in progress. The attacker is unconscious and the victim needs help. We're in the alley between Morrison and Yamhill, just off 23rd. The operator asked me to stay on the line, asked if anyone needed immediate medical attention. I looked at the woman. She was still pressed against the wall, still crying quietly, and then at the unconscious man. "I think we're okay for now," I told the operator, "but please hurry." While we waited for the police, I tried to talk to her. I took off my jacket and offered it to her, since her shirt was torn. She accepted it gratefully, pulling it around her shoulders. "I'm David," I said, keeping my distance so she wouldn't feel threatened. "Melissa," she replied, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Melissa Hartwell." "Are you sure you're not hurt? That was pretty scary back there." She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something I couldn't quite identify in her expression. Gratitude, yes, but something else too. Something that should have been a warning, but I was too focused on making sure she was okay to notice. "You saved my life," she said. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me. Anyone would have done the same thing." She shook her head. "No, they wouldn't have. Most people would have walked away, pretended they didn't hear anything." She paused, studying my face in the dim light filtering down from a nearby street lamp. "You're a good person, David." The police arrived about 10 minutes later, 2 patrol cars and an ambulance. The paramedics checked both Melissa and me over. I had some bruised ribs and scraped knuckles, nothing serious. Melissa had finger-shaped bruises on her arms and a small cut on her cheek, but she refused to go to the hospital. The unconscious man, his name was Craig Vaughn, we learned later, had to be taken to the ER with a concussion. The officers assured me that, given the circumstances, I probably wouldn't face any charges for defending Melissa, but they'd need detailed statements from both of us. That's where things started to get complicated. Detective Sarah Chen was the one who took our statements. She was thorough, professional, asking us to walk through everything that had happened step by step. When it was my turn, I told her exactly what I'd seen and heard and done. I didn't embellish anything, didn't try to make myself sound like more of a hero than I was, just the facts. Then it was Melissa's turn. I wasn't in the room when she gave her statement, but Detective Chen told me later that their stories matched up perfectly. Melissa had been walking home from her job at a downtown art gallery when Vaughn had grabbed her and dragged her into the alley. She'd fought back, but he was too strong. If I hadn't shown up when I did... Detective Chen said she'd be in touch if they needed anything else, but that it seemed pretty straightforward. A clear case of assault and attempted rape, with a witness who intervened to stop it. Vaughn would be facing serious charges once he was released from the hospital. As we left the police station, Melissa touched my arm gently. "David, I know this is probably weird, but would you mind walking me home? I don't think I can handle being alone on the street right now. Of course I said yes. What kind of person would I have been to say no after what she'd just been through? Her apartment was only about 6 blocks from the police station, in one of those renovated warehouse buildings that had been converted to lofts. We walked slowly, not talking much. She was still wearing my jacket, and I found myself stealing glances at her profile as we passed under the streetlights. Even after everything that had happened, even disheveled and shaken, she was stunning. Not just pretty, beautiful in a way that seemed almost otherworldly. The kind of woman who would normally be completely out of my league. When we reached her building, she turned to face me. "I don't know how to repay you for what you did tonight," she said. "You don't owe me anything, Melissa. I'm just glad you're safe." She looked at me for a long moment, and I saw tears starting to form in her eyes again. "Would you like to come up for coffee? I know it's late, but I don't really want to be alone right now, and you're the only person I feel safe with." Every rational part of my brain told me this was a bad idea. She was traumatized, vulnerable, probably not thinking clearly. The right thing to do would be to make sure she got inside safely and then go home. But when I looked into those green eyes, I couldn't say no. Her loft was exactly what you'd expect from someone who worked in an art gallery. Exposed brick walls covered with paintings and photographs, eclectic furniture that somehow worked together perfectly. The kind of space that belonged in a magazine spread about urban living. Everything about the place spoke to a sophistication I didn't have, a world I'd never really been part of. There were books on art history and philosophy, wine bottles that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a week, a sound system that was definitely out of my price range. "I moved here from San Francisco about 6 months ago," she said, bringing me a mug of coffee that smelled incredible. "I needed a fresh start." "What happened in San Francisco?" She sat down next to me, closer than I expected, and I caught a hint of her perfume, something subtle and expensive. Bad relationship. The kind where you lose yourself completely and don't realize it until it's almost too late. She took a sip of her coffee, wincing slightly as if it was still too hot. "I thought I was in love, but I was really just in love with the idea of being needed." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded and drank my coffee. It was the best coffee I'd ever had. "What about you?" she asked. "Ever been married?" "No, came close once, but..." I shrugged. "I guess I never met the right person." What would the right person be like? It was such a simple question, but sitting there next to her in her beautiful apartment, after what we'd just been through together, it felt loaded with meaning. "Someone genuine," I said finally. "Someone who sees the world clearly, who doesn't need rescuing but isn't afraid to be vulnerable either. Someone who makes me want to be better than I am." She smiled at that, the first real smile I'd seen from her all night. "You know, David, I think tonight was fate. I think the universe put you in that alley at exactly the right moment, not just to save me, but so we could meet." I should have been more skeptical. I should have recognized that line for what it was, something she'd probably said before, to other men in other circumstances. But I was 32 years old and tired of being alone, and here was this incredible woman telling me that fate had brought us together. So, instead of being skeptical, I leaned over and kissed her. She kissed me back, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. Like maybe she was right about fate, about the universe putting us together. Like maybe good things really did happen to people who tried to do the right thing. We talked until almost 3 a.m. about books and movies and travel and dreams. She told me about her work at the gallery, about the artists she represented and the pieces she was most proud of discovering. I told her about my job, about the satisfaction I got from solving complex problems, about my weekend hiking trips, and my dream of maybe starting my own consulting company someday. When I finally left, we exchanged phone numbers. She kissed me goodnight at her door, a soft, lingering kiss that made my head spin. "Thank you," she whispered against my lips, "for everything." Walking home that night, I felt like I was floating. Not just because I'd met an amazing woman, but because I'd done something that mattered. I'd helped someone who needed help, and maybe, just maybe, it was going to lead to something wonderful. I had no idea that I was walking toward the worst 3 years of my life. The next morning, I woke up with a text from Melissa. Thank you again for last night. I can't stop thinking about how brave you were. Would you like to have dinner tonight? I owe you at least a good meal." I texted back immediately. "You don't owe me anything, but I'd love to have dinner with you." And just like that, it began. Our first real date was at a small Italian restaurant in the Pearl District. She looked incredible in a simple black dress that probably cost more than my monthly car payment, and I felt slightly underdressed in my best khakis and button-down shirt. But she didn't seem to mind. If anything, she seemed charmed by my nervousness. "You're not what I expected," she said over antipasti. "What did you expect?" "I don't know, someone more aggressive? Most men who would jump into a fight like that, they have something to prove. But you're gentle." I took that as a compliment, though looking back, I wonder if it was.
We talked about our childhoods over dinner. She grew up in Marin County, the daughter of a successful real estate developer and a former model turned interior designer. Private schools, summer camps in Switzerland, college at Stanford where she'd studied art history and psychology. Her life sounded like something out of a movie to me. My story was more mundane. Middle-class kid from Eugene, parents who worked their asses off to put me through Oregon State. My dad was a high school math teacher. My mom worked as a secretary at a law firm. They divorced when I was 16, and I'd spent my senior year of high school shuttling between their apartments, trying to make sure neither of them felt like I was choosing sides. "That must have been hard," she said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "Being the mediator between two people you love." It was, but it taught me how to see all sides of a situation, how to find solutions that work for everyone. She smiled at that, but there was something sad in her eyes. I wish I could do that. I tend to see things in black and white. People are either good or bad, trustworthy or not, and makes relationships complicated. After dinner, we walked along the waterfront. The city looked beautiful at night, all lights reflecting on the Willamette River. We found a bench overlooking the water and sat close together, her head on my shoulder. "David," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something about what happened last night." My stomach clenched. "What is it?" "The man who attacked me, Craig Vaughn, I knew him." I pulled back to look at her face. "What do you mean you knew him?" "He was a customer at the gallery. He'd been coming in for months, buying small pieces, always very polite and professional. Last week he asked me out, and I said no. I guess he didn't take rejection well." "Jesus, Melissa, that makes it even worse." "I know, and I'm scared he's going to come after me again when he gets out of jail." Without thinking, I put my arm around her. "He's not going to hurt you. I won't let him." She looked up at me with those green eyes, and I saw something that made my chest tighten with emotion. "You really mean that, don't you?" "Of course I do. I've never had someone want to protect me before. Not really, not like this." She kissed me then, right there on the bench overlooking the river, and I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just attraction anymore. This was something deeper, more dangerous. This was me falling in love with a woman I'd known for exactly 24 hours.
Over the next few weeks, we were inseparable. She'd come to my apartment after work and we'd cook dinner together. Or rather, she'd cook while I watched and tried to help without getting in the way. She was an incredible cook, the kind of person who could whip up a gourmet meal from whatever happened to be in my refrigerator. We'd spend weekends at her place, drinking wine and listening to music I'd never heard of but immediately loved. She'd show me paintings and sculptures at the gallery, explaining the history and technique behind pieces that looked like abstract chaos to me, but somehow made perfect sense when she talked about them. She made me feel sophisticated in a way I'd never felt before. Like I was the kind of person who belonged in art galleries and wine bars and restaurants where the servers knew your name. She was passionate and uninhibited in a way that made me feel like I'd been sleepwalking through every previous relationship I'd ever had. She knew exactly what she wanted and wasn't shy about asking for it, but she was also attentive to what I needed in ways that left me stunned and grateful. 3 weeks after we met, she told me she loved me. We were lying in her bed on a Sunday morning, sunlight streaming through the tall windows of her loft. She was tracing patterns on my chest with her fingertip, and I was in that drowsy, post-sex haze where everything feels perfect and possible. "David," she said softly, "I love you." I opened my eyes and looked down at her. She was watching me carefully, as if she was trying to gauge my reaction. "I love you too," I said, and I meant it completely. She smiled and kissed my chest. "I was hoping you'd say that. Why wouldn't I? You're incredible, Melissa. You're smart and beautiful and talented, and I can't believe you're with me." She propped herself up on her elbow and looked at me seriously. "That's what I love about you, David. You don't know how special you are. Most men, they're so full of themselves, so concerned with proving how important they are. But you're genuinely humble. You see the good in people. You risk your own safety to help a stranger. Anyone would have done what I did." "No, they wouldn't have. Trust me, I know what most people are like when someone needs help." There was something in her voice when she said that, something bitter and knowing, but I was too happy to pay attention to it. A month after we started dating, she asked me to move in with her. "It's silly for you to keep paying rent on that little apartment when you're here every night anyway," she said. We were making breakfast in her kitchen. She was making breakfast while I tried to help, and the morning light was hitting her auburn hair in a way that made her look like something out of a Renaissance painting. "Are you sure? We've only been together a month." "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." She turned to face me, spatula in hand, and I saw that vulnerability again, the same look she'd had in the alley the night we met. "I know it's fast, but nothing about us has been normal from the beginning. We met because you saved my life, David. That has to mean something." She was right. Nothing about our relationship had been normal. Most people date for months before saying "I love you." Most people take even longer before moving in together. But most people don't meet the way we did. So I said yes. Moving my stuff into her loft took exactly one afternoon. I didn't have much: some clothes, books, my computer, a few pieces of furniture that looked shabby and out of place next to her expensive things. She insisted we get rid of most of my stuff and buy new things together, things that would work with the aesthetic of the space. I should have paid more attention to how easily she convinced me to throw away pieces of my life. The first few months of living together were amazing. I'd wake up next to her every morning, beautiful and warm and mine. We'd have coffee together before work, and she'd text me throughout the day with little messages that made me smile. In the evenings, we'd cook together or go to gallery openings or wine tastings, events where I met her friends and colleagues and tried not to feel out of place. Her friends were like her, sophisticated, educated, the kind of people who knew about art and wine and travel. They were polite to me, but I always felt like I was being evaluated, like they were trying to figure out what someone like Melissa was doing with someone like me. "Don't worry about them," she'd tell me when I mentioned feeling awkward at social events. "They're just not used to seeing me with someone genuine. I usually date pretentious assholes who think they're more important than they are." That should have been another warning sign. The way she talked about her exes, the casual cruelty in her voice when she described them. But I was too busy feeling grateful that she'd chosen me over all those other guys to wonder why all her previous relationships had ended badly. 6 months after we moved in together, Craig Vaughn went to trial. I had to testify, of course. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Janet Morrison, walked me through what had happened that night, step by step. I told the jury how I'd heard Melissa scream, how I'd found Vaughn attacking her in the alley, how we'd fought and he'd hit his head when he fell. Vaughn's defense attorney tried to make it sound like I'd overreacted, like maybe Vaughn and Melissa had just been having a heated conversation that I'd misinterpreted. But the physical evidence was clear: Melissa's torn clothing, the bruises on her arms, Vaughn's blood alcohol level. Melissa's testimony was devastating. She described the attack in vivid detail, how Vaughn had followed her from the gallery, how he'd grabbed her and dragged her into the alley, how he'd torn her shirt and told her exactly what he was going to do to her. She cried on the stand, and I saw several jurors wipe their eyes. When the defense attorney tried to suggest that she'd led Vaughn on somehow, that her refusal to date him had been unnecessarily cruel, she looked him right in the eye and said, "No woman owes any man her body or her affection, no matter how politely he asks for it." The jury convicted Vaughn of assault and attempted rape. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison. After the trial, Melissa and I went out to celebrate. She was giddy with relief, laughing and crying at the same time. "It's finally over," she kept saying. "I can finally stop being afraid." But it wasn't over. Not really, because 3 days later, Detective Chan called me at work. "David, I need you to come down to the station. There's something we need to discuss." "What's wrong? Is Melissa okay?" "Just come in, okay? We'll talk when you get here." I left work immediately, my mind racing through possibilities. Had Vaughn somehow appealed the verdict? Had something happened to Melissa? Detective Chen was waiting for me in the same interview room where I'd given my statement 8 months earlier. But this time, she wasn't alone. There was another detective with her, a guy I didn't recognize, and a woman in a business suit who looked like a lawyer. "David, this is Detective Rodriguez and Ada Patricia Hoffman. We need to talk about your testimony in the Vaughn case." "I don't understand. Is there a problem with the conviction?" Detective Chan exchanged a look with the others. "David, we've received some new information about what happened that night in the alley. Information that contradicts the testimony you and Melissa gave." My heart started pounding. What kind of information? "A witness has come forward, someone who saw the entire incident from start to finish." The room felt like it was spinning. What did they see? Ada Hoffman leaned forward. "David, I need to ask you directly. Did you know Melissa Hartwell before the night of October 15th? "No, of course not. I told you, I'd never seen her before that night." "And you maintain that you intervened to stop Craig Vaughn from assaulting her?" "Yes, that's exactly what happened." Detective Rodriguez opened a folder and pulled out a photograph. It was a security camera image, grainy and dark, but clear enough to make out figures in an alley. "This is from a camera across the street from where the incident occurred. The timestamp shows 8:17 p.m. on October 15th. He slid the photo across the table to me. At first, I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. Then the figures came into focus, and my blood turned to ice. The photo showed 3 people in the alley. Craig Vaughn was there, but he wasn't attacking anyone. He was lying on the ground, apparently unconscious. Melissa was standing over him, her shirt torn, but she wasn't cowering or crying. She was talking to me, and I was handing her something. It looked like money." "David," Detective Chan said gently, "we need you to tell us what really happened that night." I stared at that photograph for what felt like an eternity, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. The image was grainy, taken from a distance, but there was no denying what it showed. 3 people in an alley, Vaughn on the ground, Melissa standing over him, and me, apparently giving her something that looks suspiciously like cash. "I don't understand," I said, my voice sounding strange and distant even to my own ears. "This doesn't make sense." Detective Chen leaned back in her chair, studying my face carefully. "David, we've known each other for 8 months now. I've always thought you were a straight shooter, so I'm going to give you one more chance to tell us what really happened that night." "I told you what happened. I heard her scream. I ran into the alley. I found him attacking her. We fought. He fell and hit his head. That's the truth." Ada Hoffman tapped her pen against the table. "The witness who came forward saw something very different. They saw you and Melissa together before Vaughn even entered the alley. They saw what appeared to be a setup." The word setup hit me like a physical blow. "A setup? What are you talking about? Set up for what?" Detective Rodriguez pulled out another file. Craig Vaughn wasn't just some random guy who couldn't take no for an answer. He was a private investigator. The room started spinning again. What? He was hired by Melissa's ex-husband in San Francisco to gather information about her activities, specifically to document that she was dating someone new, which would impact their ongoing divorce proceedings. I felt like I was drowning. That's impossible. She told me she'd never been married. The 3 of them exchanged glances, and I saw something like pity in Detective Chan's eyes. "David," she said softly, "Melissa Hartwell has been married to Thomas Hartwell, a prominent San Francisco attorney, for 7 years. They've been separated for 18 months, but they're still legally married. Their divorce case involves significant assets. We're talking about millions of dollars. The coffee I'd had that morning threatened to come back up. No, that's not right. She would have told me. We live together. We've been together for 8 months. She loves me." The witness who came forward is a retired police officer who lives in one of the apartments overlooking that alley, Detective Rodriguez continued, his voice professional but not unkind. He saw you and Melissa talking before Vaughn appeared. He saw her point Vaughn out to you. He saw you approach Vaughn and hit him from behind with what looked like a tire iron or similar weapon. That's not true. I stood up so fast my chair nearly fell over. I would never hit someone from behind. I'm not that kind of person. The witness says after you hit Vaughn and he went down, Melissa tore her own shirt. Then you gave her money. The witness thinks it was payment for her performance. I sat back down heavily, my legs suddenly unable to support me. This is insane. Why would I do any of that? What would I possibly gain from helping her fake an assault? Ada Hoffman leaned forward. That's what we're trying to figure out, David. Did Melissa pay you to help her? Was this part of some insurance fraud scheme? Were you trying to set up a lawsuit against Vaughn's employer? I don't know anything about insurance fraud or lawsuits. I've never committed a crime in my life. I pay my taxes. I don't even speed when I'm driving. The idea that I would participate in some elaborate con is ridiculous. But even as I said it, pieces started clicking together in my mind. The photograph on the security camera, the way Melissa had seemed to know exactly what to say to the police, how quickly she'd invited me up to her apartment that night, how she told me she loved me after just 3 weeks, the expensive apartment that seemed beyond what someone working at an art gallery could afford, the way her friends had looked at me like I didn't belong. The casual way she'd convinced me to throw away my own belongings when I moved in with her. I need to see her, I said suddenly. I need to talk to Melissa. Detective Chen shook her head. That's not going to be possible right now, David. Why not? Because Melissa Hartwell left Portland 3 days ago, right after Vaughn's conviction. Her apartment is empty, and according to the gallery owner, she quit her job via email yesterday morning. The world tilted sideways. She's gone? We think she went back to San Francisco, probably to finalize her divorce now that she has documentation of being victimized, which would strengthen her position in the settlement negotiations. I put my head in my hands. 8 months of my life. 8 months of thinking I'd found the love of my life, thinking I was the luckiest man alive. 8 months of believing that I'd done something heroic, that I'd saved someone who needed saving. David, Ada Hoffman said, we need to know, did you know about any of this? Were you working with her from the beginning? I looked up at her. Do you really think I'm that good of an actor? Look at me. I'm falling apart. I had no idea about any of this, and I really hadn't. The shock and confusion I was feeling weren't things you could fake. The way my hands were shaking, the nausea that was making it hard to concentrate, these were the reactions of someone whose entire world had just been turned upside down. Detective Chen seemed to believe me. We think you were used, David. We think Melissa picked you specifically because you were the type of person who would intervene if you saw someone being attacked. Someone with a strong moral compass who wouldn't ask too many questions. But how could she have known I'd be walking down that street at that exact time? We're still working on that. But she'd been watching you for weeks, maybe months, learning your routines, your habits. She knew you walked home from work sometimes instead of taking the bus. She knew you took that route. The idea that I'd been stalked, studied, selected like a mark in some elaborate con game made my skin crawl. So everything was fake? Everything she said? Everything we had together? We don't know yet, Detective Rodriguez admitted. It's possible some of her feelings were genuine, but the initial setup, the attack in the alley, that was definitely planned. I sat there in stunned silence, trying to process what they were telling me. The woman I loved, the woman I've been living with for 6 months, had used me in some elaborate scheme to defraud her husband in their divorce proceedings. And now she was gone. What happens to me now? I asked finally. That depends, Ada Hoffman said. If you cooperate with our investigation, if you help us understand exactly what happened and how she manipulated you, we might be able to work something out. But David, you need to understand, you did assault Craig Vaughn. Even if you were manipulated into doing it, even if you thought you were helping someone, a man was seriously injured. He was a private investigator trying to spy on her. That doesn't justify assault with a deadly weapon. Vaughn has permanent brain damage from when his head hit the concrete. He'll never work again. The weight of that hit me like a physical blow. I'd destroyed a man's life based on a lie. Craig Vaughn hadn't been trying to rape anyone. He'd been doing his job, trying to document Melissa's activities for her divorce case. And now he was permanently disabled because of me. "I need a lawyer," I said quietly. "That's probably a good idea," Detective Chan agreed. "But David, think about this. Melissa used you. Then she disappeared the moment she got what she wanted. She left you here to face the consequences alone. She doesn't deserve your loyalty." She was right, but it didn't make the betrayal hurt any less. They let me leave, but I knew I was in serious trouble. I drove home, to the apartment that had been our home, that was now just an empty space full of expensive furniture I couldn't afford, in a daze. The place felt different without her there. Bigger, emptier, but also somehow foreign, like I'd been living in someone else's life and was just now waking up to find myself in a stranger's home. I walked through the rooms, looking for signs that she'd ever really been there, evidence that our relationship had been real. Her clothes were gone from the closet. Her toiletries had been removed from the bathroom. The kitchen, which had always smelled like whatever incredible meal she was preparing, now just smelled like nothing. But then I found something she'd left behind. In the back of the bedroom closet, behind a box of winter coats, I discovered a small cardboard box I'd never seen before. Inside were documents, legal papers related to her divorce, photographs, and what looked like surveillance notes about me. The photographs were the worst part. Pictures of me walking to work, eating lunch at my usual cafe, working out at my gym. Pictures taken with a telephoto lens from a distance, the kind of surveillance photos you see in movies about stalkers and private investigators. The notes were even worse. They detailed my routines, my habits, my personality traits. "Subject is predictable in his routes and timing," one note read. "Responds positively to vulnerability in others. Strong protective instincts. Unlikely to question victim story." There were psychological profiles, assessments of my character that reduced me to a list of weaknesses to be exploited. Subject appears lonely, isolated, works long hours, has no close relationships, would be grateful for attention from attractive woman. Low self-esteem makes him unlikely to question why someone like M would be interested in him. Reading those notes was like looking at myself through the eyes of a predator. Every insecurity I'd ever had about my appearance, my social status, my worthiness of love, she'd identified and cataloged them all. But the worst document was at the bottom of the box. A letter addressed to me, sealed in an envelope with my name written in her elegant handwriting. I stared at that envelope for a long time before I opened it. Part of me didn't want to know what was inside, didn't want to hear whatever justification or explanation she might offer. But I had to know. The letter was 3 pages long, handwritten on expensive stationery that smelled faintly of her perfume. "David," it began, "if you're reading this, it means the investigation has progressed further than I hoped it would, and you've discovered some things about our relationship that I never wanted you to know. I'm writing this as insurance, in case I need to explain myself someday, but I hope you never find it. First, I want you to know that not everything between us was a lie. When I first started watching you, studying your patterns and habits, you were just a mark to me, someone I could use to solve a problem. But the more I learned about you, the more I genuinely came to care about you. You are exactly who you appear to be, David. You're kind and honest and decent in ways that most people aren't. You see the good in people, even when they don't deserve it. You helped me not because you wanted something in return, but because it was the right thing to do. Those are rare qualities in this world. I know you're probably wondering how I could do this to you, how I could use someone I claim to love. The answer is complicated, but I'll try to explain. My marriage to Thomas was a nightmare from the very beginning. He married me for my looks and my family's connections, and I married him because I was young and stupid and thought wealth would make me happy. For 7 years, he controlled every aspect of my life, where I went, what I wore, who I could talk to. He was never physically abusive, but emotional abuse can be just as devastating. When I finally found the courage to leave him, he used his legal connections and political influence to make my life hell. He froze our joint accounts, made it impossible for me to get credit, even had me evicted from the apartment I was renting because he had connections with the property management company. The private investigator was just the latest escalation. Thomas hired Craig Vaughn to document everything I did, everyone I talked to, trying to build a case that I was unstable or promiscuous or undeserving of any portion of our shared assets. I tried to handle it through legal channels, but Thomas has more money and better lawyers than I could ever afford. He was slowly destroying my life, and I was running out of options. That's when I came up with the plan. I knew that if I could document being victimized, if I could show that Thomas's investigator had crossed the line into harassment or assault, it would shift the power dynamic in our divorce proceedings. Thomas would have to distance himself from Vaughn's actions, and I'd have leverage to negotiate a fair settlement. The plan was simple. Stage an encounter with Vaughn that would escalate into something that looked like assault, then have a witness intervene to save me. The witness would be someone with no connection to the divorce case, someone whose testimony couldn't be questioned. I spent weeks looking for the right person. I needed someone with a strong moral compass who would intervene if they saw someone being attacked, someone who looked reliable and trustworthy to a jury, someone who wouldn't ask too many questions about the circumstances. I found you. I studied your routines for almost 2 months before making contact. I learned your schedule, your walking routes, your habits. I knew you sometimes walked home from work instead of taking the bus, and I knew which streets you preferred. The night we met, I called Vaughn and told him I wanted to talk, that I was ready to cooperate with his investigation. I suggested we meet in that alley because it was private and discreet. What I didn't tell him was that I'd made sure you would be walking by at exactly the right time. When you showed up, everything went according to plan. Vaughn was confused and angry, but not actually violent. The fight, you remember, was mostly me tearing my own shirt and making noise while you and Vaughn struggled. When he fell and hit his head, that was an accident. I never intended for him to be seriously hurt. What I didn't plan for was falling in love with you. It started almost immediately. The way you looked at me in that alley, the genuine concern in your eyes. I hadn't seen that kind of pure, unselfish caring in years. And then, as we spent more time together, I realized you were everything I'd pretended Thomas was when we first met. You listened when I talked. You cared about my opinions. You made me feel like I mattered as a person, not just as an object or a status symbol. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like someone saw the real me and loved me anyway. I know it's hard to believe, given what you now know about how we met, but the 8 months we spent together were the happiest of my life. Every morning I woke up next to you, I felt grateful and guilty in equal measure. Grateful to have found real love, and guilty that it was built on such a horrible foundation. I tried to tell you the truth so many times. I'd start to bring it up, then lose my courage. How do you explain to someone you love that your entire relationship started as a con? How do you ask someone to forgive that level of betrayal? So I kept putting it off, telling myself I'd find the right moment, the right words. I thought maybe after the trial was over, after Thomas and I finalized our divorce, I could find a way to make it right. I thought maybe we could start over with a clean slate. But then the trial ended, and I realized it was too late. The lies had grown too big, and the consequences were too serious. Craig Vaughn was seriously injured because of what I did, and you were going to be held responsible for it. I couldn't let that happen. So I made the hardest decision of my life. I left. I'm going back to San Francisco to finalize my divorce and to turn myself in to the police. I'm going to tell them everything, how I manipulated you, how I staged the whole thing, how you were innocent of any wrongdoing. I'm going to make sure they understand that you were a victim in this too. I don't expect you to forgive me, David. What I did was unforgivable. I used your goodness against you, manipulated your natural desire to help people, and put you in a position where you could have been seriously hurt or killed. But I need you to know that I love you. Not the way I loved the idea of Thomas when we first met. Not the shallow, selfish love I thought was normal. I love you the way you deserve to be loved. Completely, honestly, with full appreciation for the incredible person you are. You're going to be okay. You're strong and smart and good, and once this mess is cleaned up, you're going to find someone who deserves you. Someone who will love you without lies or manipulation or hidden agendas. I'm sorry, David. I'm sorry for all of it. You deserved so much better than what I gave you. Love always, Melissa. I read the letter 3 times before I could fully process what it said. She'd confessed everything. The surveillance, the manipulation, the staged attack. She'd explained her motivations and apologized for the betrayal. And she'd claimed she was going to turn herself in to clear my name. But words on paper were easy to write and hard to verify. People could say anything in a letter. I called Detective Chen immediately. Did Melissa Hartwell turn herself in to the San Francisco police? I asked without preamble. There was a pause. How did you know she was supposed to? I found a letter she left. She said she was going to confess everything to clear my name. David, I need you to come back to the station. Bring the letter. Just tell me, did she turn herself in or not? Another pause. No, David, she didn't. As far as we can tell, she's disappeared completely. Her credit cards haven't been used, her phone is disconnected, and she never showed up at her husband's house in San Francisco. I felt something die inside my chest. Even her final promise, her last gesture of love and remorse, had been a lie. David, are you there? Yeah, I'm here. Bring the letter and come in. We need to talk about next steps. I hung up and looked around the empty apartment one more time. 8 months of my life gone. The woman I'd loved, gone. My sense of who I was and what I was capable of, gone. But I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was also a perpetrator. I'd put an innocent man in the hospital because I'd been too trusting, too eager to play hero, too willing to believe that someone like Melissa could actually love someone like me. I gathered up all the documents from the box, including the letter, and headed back to the police station. It was time to face the consequences of my stupidity. But as I drove through the Portland streets where I'd walked with Melissa, where we'd built what I thought was a real relationship, I couldn't stop thinking about one thing she'd written in her letter. She'd said Craig Vaughn falling and hitting his head was an accident, that she never intended for him to be seriously hurt. But the security camera photos showed me handing her what looked like money after Vaughn was unconscious. If the whole thing had been staged, if she just wanted to document being victimized, why would I have given her money? What had I been paying for? There was something about that night, something about what had really happened in that alley that still wasn't adding up. And if Melissa had lied about everything else, how could I trust her version of events in the letter? I was about to find out that the truth was even worse than I'd imagined. Back at the police station, Detective Chen, Detective Rodriguez, and Ada Hoffman read Melissa's letter with the kind of focused intensity that made me realize just how deep I was in this mess. When they finished, the 3 of them exchanged looks that I was starting to recognize. The kind of professional communication that happens when law enforcement officers know something you don't. David, Detective Chen said finally, this letter raises more questions than it answers. What do you mean? Ada Hoffman leaned forward. If everything happened the way she describes in this letter, if the assault was completely staged, then why does the security footage show you giving her money? What were you paying for? I'd been wondering the same thing. I don't know. I don't remember giving her any money that night. The witness who came forward is willing to testify that he saw a monetary exchange between you and Melissa after Vaughn was unconscious. He's a former police officer with no reason to lie about what he saw. Detective Rodriguez opened another file.
We've also been looking into Melissa's background more thoroughly. What we found doesn't match the story she told you, or the story in this letter. My stomach dropped. What did you find? For starters, she's not married to Thomas Hartwell. She was, but they divorced 2 years ago. The settlement was finalized 18 months before you met her. I stared at him. That's impossible. She was still going through the divorce when I met her. She talked about it all the time. David, Thomas Hartwell remarried a year ago. He's been living in Seattle with his new wife and their infant daughter. He hasn't had any contact with Melissa since their divorce was finalized. The room started spinning again. But the private investigator? Craig Vaughn wasn't hired by Thomas Hartwell. He wasn't working a case involving Melissa at all. Then what was he doing in that alley? Detective Chen pulled out another photograph, this one a clear shot of Craig Vaughn's driver's license and private investigator credentials. Vaughn was conducting surveillance on someone else entirely, a cheating spouse case that had nothing to do with Melissa. He was in that alley because his actual target lived in one of the buildings nearby. I felt like I was drowning. Every piece of information they gave me contradicted something I thought I knew, something Melissa had told me. So if Vaughn wasn't investigating her and she wasn't going through a messy divorce, then what was this all about? Why did she set this up? Ada Hoffman opened yet another file. We think it was insurance fraud. Melissa took out a significant personal injury policy about 6 months before you met her. The kind of policy that pays out big money for trauma-related claims. How big? $2 million. The number hit me like a physical blow. $2 million. Enough money to disappear completely, to start a new life anywhere in the world. She used me to commit insurance fraud? That's what we think. The plan was to stage an assault, get you to intervene as a witness, then claim severe psychological trauma from the attack. With your testimony backing up her story, and with Vaughn's injuries making the assault look real and violent, she'd have a strong case for a major payout. I put my head in my hands. I'd been played on a level I couldn't even comprehend. Not just manipulated into helping with her divorce, as she'd claimed in the letter, but used as an unwitting accomplice in a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. The money you gave her that night, Detective Rodriguez continued, we think that was payment for her performance. She probably told you it was for medical expenses, or to help her get away from her dangerous ex-husband, or some other sob story designed to make you feel protective and generous. I don't remember giving her any money, I insisted.
But even as I said it, I was trying to recall the details of that night. The adrenaline, the confusion, the way she'd looked so vulnerable and grateful. Had she asked me for money? Had I offered it? David, Detective Chen said gently, memory can be tricky, especially in traumatic situations. You'd just been in a fight. You were concerned about this woman who seemed to need help. If she asked you for cash to get a taxi home or to pay for a hotel room where she'd feel safe, would you have given it to her? I thought about it. The answer was yes, absolutely. If Melissa had asked me for money that night, claimed she needed it to feel safe, I would have given her everything in my wallet without question. Maybe, I admitted. If she asked for help, yeah, I probably would have given her money. So you don't actually remember not giving her money. You just don't have a clear memory of giving it to her. The distinction was important. Not remembering something happening wasn't the same as remembering it not happening, and trauma could definitely affect memory formation and recall. David, Ada Hoffman said, I need to be direct with you. Based on the evidence we have, it looks like you were a willing participant in this scheme from the beginning. The surveillance footage, the monetary exchange, the fact that you lived with her for 8 months afterward, it all suggests a level of cooperation that goes beyond being an innocent victim. That's not true. I never agreed to help her defraud an insurance company. I didn't even know she had an insurance policy. But you admit you might have given her money that night. If she asked for help, yeah, but not as payment for faking an assault. I thought I was helping a victim.
Detective Rodriguez leaned back in his chair. Here's the problem, David. From the outside, looking at the evidence, your story doesn't make a lot of sense. Why would Melissa run such an elaborate con just to get a witness to an assault? Why not just pay someone to pretend to attack her? Why go through months of surveillance and relationship building with you? I don't know. Maybe she needed someone trustworthy, someone whose testimony couldn't be questioned. Or maybe, Ada Hoffman said, she needed someone who would be willing to seriously injure Craig Vaughn, someone who would hit him hard enough to cause real damage, making the assault look genuine and violent.
The implication hit me like a sledgehammer. They were suggesting that I'd intentionally tried to hurt Vaughn, that the severity of his injuries was part of the plan rather than an accident. I would never do that. I'm not a violent person. But you did seriously injure him, David. Craig Vaughn has permanent brain damage. He'll never work again, never fully recover from what happened that night. That level of injury doesn't usually result from someone just trying to break up a fight. I stood up abruptly. I want a lawyer right now. They didn't try to stop me. In fact, they seemed to have been expecting it. That's your right, Detective Chen said. But David, think about this carefully. Right now, we're treating you as someone who might have been manipulated into participating in a crime. If you lawyer up and stop cooperating, we'll have to assume you were a willing participant from the beginning. I've told you everything I know. I've been completely honest with you. Have you? Detective Rodriguez asked. Because we also found something else interesting when we looked into Melissa's background. He pulled out a printout of what looked like a bank statement. 3 days before you met Melissa, you deposited $5,000 into your checking account. Cash deposit, no source of funds identified. My blood ran cold. I had deposited $5,000, but it wasn't connected to Melissa or any kind of criminal scheme. That money came from my grandmother. She died 2 weeks before I met Melissa, and she left me some cash. I deposited it when I got back from her funeral. Can you prove that? I don't know. Maybe. There might be documentation from the estate or the funeral home receipts. I didn't think I'd need to prove where the money came from. Ada Hoffman made a note on her Lego pad. David, the timing is suspicious. You receive a large cash payment shortly before getting involved with Melissa. Then, you're present when Craig Vaughn is seriously injured, and there's evidence of you giving Melissa money afterward. From a prosecutorial standpoint, it looks like you were paid in advance for your participation. That's insane. The money from my grandmother has nothing to do with Melissa or what happened in that alley. Maybe, but you need to understand how this looks to us and how it would look to a jury. You have to admit the timing is quite a coincidence. I realized I was trapped. Every piece of evidence they had could be interpreted in a way that made me look guilty, even if there were innocent explanations. The fact that I'd lived with Melissa for 8 months made it look like we were partners in crime, rather than indicating that I'd been manipulated by someone I loved. I'm done talking, I said. I want a lawyer, and I'm not saying another word until I have one. Detective Chen nodded. That's your choice, David. But before you go, there's one more thing you should know. She pulled out a final photograph. This one was recent, taken with a telephoto lens. It showed Melissa sitting at an outdoor cafe, wearing sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat. She was smiling, looking relaxed and happy, talking to a man I didn't recognize.
This was taken yesterday in Cabo San Lucas. Melissa isn't hiding in fear or turning herself in to the police. She's living it up at a 5-star resort, probably celebrating the success of her con. Looking at that photograph was like being stabbed in the chest. While I was sitting in a police station facing potential criminal charges and the destruction of my reputation and career, she was sipping drinks on a beach in Mexico. The man she's with, Detective Chen continued, we think he might be her next mark, or possibly a partner in this scheme. We're not sure yet. I stared at the photograph, trying to reconcile the image of Melissa laughing at a cafe with the woman who had written me that letter full of love and regret and promises to make things right. David, Ada Hoffman said, I know this is hard to process, but Melissa Hartwell is a professional con artist. This isn't the first time she's done something like this, and it won't be the last.
You were her victim, just as much as Craig Vaughn was. But if you don't help us build a case against her, you're going to end up taking the fall for her crimes." I left the police station in a daze, my mind reeling with everything they told me. 8 months of my life had been a complete fabrication. The woman I'd loved, the woman I'd planned to spend my future with, was a criminal who had used me to commit fraud and assault. But more than that, I was facing the very real possibility of going to prison for crimes I didn't even understand I was committing. I spent the rest of that day calling lawyers, trying to find someone who would take my case. Most of them wanted retainers I couldn't afford, and the ones who would consider payment plans weren't encouraging about my prospects. "The evidence is circumstantial," one attorney told me, "but it's compelling. The prosecution will argue that you were Melissa's partner from the beginning, that you were paid to seriously injure Vaughn to make the assault look real. Your relationship with her afterwards supports their theory that you were working together. But I wasn't working with her. I had no idea any of this was planned." "I believe you," the lawyer said, "but believing you and proving it to a jury are two different things. The fact that Melissa has disappeared makes it impossible to get her testimony to support your version of events. What about the letter she left? Doesn't that prove I was innocent?" "The letter helps, but it's not admissible in court as evidence of your innocence. It's hearsay, and since she wrote it knowing it might be found by the police, a prosecutor would argue it was just another part of her manipulation, creating a document that would make you look innocent while she escaped with the money. Every conversation I had with potential lawyers made my situation look worse. I was facing charges of assault with a deadly weapon, conspiracy to commit fraud, and possibly other crimes I hadn't even been told about yet. The maximum sentence could be 15 to 20 years in prison." That night, alone in the apartment that had once felt like home, I sat on the couch where Melissa and I had spent countless evenings together and tried to figure out how my life had gone so completely off the rails. I thought about calling my parents, but what would I say? "Hi, Mom, remember how I told you I'd found the love of my life? Well, it turns out she was a con artist who used me to commit insurance fraud, and now I might go to prison for 20 years? I thought about calling Jake from work or some of my other acquaintances, but I realized I didn't actually have any close friends. I'd let my social life atrophy while I was building what I thought was a serious relationship with Melissa. She had become my entire world, and now that she was gone, I had nobody. The isolation was crushing. Not just the physical loneliness of being alone in that apartment, but the psychological isolation of realizing that I had nobody in my life who really knew me, nobody who would stand by me if things got bad, and things were definitely going to get bad. 2 days later, Detective Chen called me at work. "David, we've received some new information. Craig Vaughn's family is filing a civil lawsuit against you for damages related to his injuries. They're seeking $2 million in compensation." The irony wasn't lost on me. $2 million, the exact amount Melissa had stood to gain from her insurance fraud. Also, Detective Chen continued, ADA Hoffman has decided to move forward with criminal charges. You're being indicted on charges of assault with a deadly weapon and conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. You need to turn yourself in by Friday. I hung up the phone and stared at my computer screen, at the lines of code I'd been working on. In a few days, I'd be in jail. My job would be gone, my reputation would be destroyed, and I'd be facing decades in prison for crimes I still didn't fully understand. But as I sat there in my cubicle, surrounded by the ordinary routine of my ordinary life, one thought kept nagging at me. The security camera footage showed me giving Melissa money after Vaughn was unconscious, but I still couldn't remember doing it, and the more I thought about it, the more certain I became that something was wrong with that story. If I'd been paying her for her performance, if I'd known the assault was fake, why would I wait until after Vaughn was injured to give her the money? Wouldn't payment have happened before the performance, or at least during it? And why would I give her money in full view of the security camera? If I'd been smart enough to participate in an elaborate fraud scheme, wouldn't I have been smart enough to make the payment somewhere more private? There was something about that night, something about the sequence of events that didn't match any of the stories I'd been told, not Melissa's version in her letter, and not the police theory about insurance fraud. I had 3 days before I had to turn myself in. 3 days to figure out what had really happened in that alley and why I'd apparently given money to a woman I'd just met. 3 days to find some version of the truth that might save my life. I started by going back to the alley where it all began. It looked different in daylight, smaller, less threatening. Just a narrow space between two buildings, lined with dumpsters and fire escapes. It was hard to believe that such an ordinary place had been the setting for the destruction of my life. I walked the length of the alley slowly, trying to remember every detail of that night. Where exactly had I found Melissa and Vaughn? Where had the fight taken place? Where had Vaughn fallen? Then I looked up at the surrounding buildings, trying to figure out where the security camera must have been positioned to get the footage the police had shown me. Based on the angle of the photo, it had to be somewhere across the street, probably in one of the apartment buildings. I spent the next hour walking around the neighborhood, looking for security cameras, trying to determine exactly which one had captured the footage. Most of the cameras I could see were positioned to monitor building entrances or parking areas, not the alley itself. Finally, I spotted it. A small security camera mounted on the corner of a building across the street, angled in a way that would give it a partial view of the alley. The building was one of those converted Victorian houses that had been split into apartments for young professionals, exactly the kind of place where someone like me might live. I knocked on the door of the first-floor apartment, hoping to talk to whoever lived there about what they might have seen that night. An elderly woman answered, looking at me suspiciously through the chain-locked door. "Excuse me, ma'am. I'm investigating an incident that happened in the alley across the street about 9 months ago. I was wondering if you might have seen anything unusual that night, or if you know who manages the security camera on your building." She looked at me like I might be a door-to-door serial killer. "I don't know anything about any cameras. You should talk to the property manager." She gave me a phone number and quickly shut the door. The property manager was more helpful, but not in the way I'd hoped. The security camera belonged to the building, but the footage was only kept for 30 days before being automatically deleted. 9 months later, there was no way to recover the original video. "But," the property manager said, "I remember that night. The police came around asking questions about the camera footage. Nice lady, detective, very professional." "Detective Chen?" "That sounds right. She said there had been an assault in the alley, and they needed the camera footage as evidence. I gave them everything we had from that night." "Did you watch the footage before you gave it to them?" He shrugged. "Just to make sure we were giving them the right time period. It wasn't very clear, though. That camera is pretty old, and the alley doesn't have great lighting." I thanked him and left, feeling more confused than ever. If the camera footage wasn't very clear, how had the police been able to identify specific details like me handing Melissa money? That afternoon, I called the one lawyer who had seemed most competent and asked him to request copies of all the evidence the prosecution planned to use against me. It was going to cost money I didn't have, but I needed to see everything they had. "The security footage is particularly important," I told him. "I need to see exactly what it shows, not just hear their interpretation of it." "I can get that for you," the lawyer said. "But David, even if there are problems with some of the evidence, you still have the fundamental issue of Craig Vaughn's injuries. Even if you were manipulated into participating, you still seriously hurt an innocent man." "I know, but I need to understand what really happened that night before I can figure out how to deal with the consequences." 2 days later, I got copies of all the evidence files. The security camera footage was surprisingly clear, clearer than the property manager had suggested it would be. And when I watched it, I finally understood why nothing about this case had made sense. The footage did show 3 people in the alley at the time of the incident. It did show Vaughn on the ground, apparently unconscious. It did show Melissa standing over him with her shirt torn. But it didn't show me giving her money. It showed me taking money from her. I watched that security footage 20 times before I could accept what I was seeing. The quality was grainy, the lighting was poor, but the sequence of events was unmistakable. After Vaughn fell and hit his head, after Melissa tore her shirt, she reached into her purse and handed me something. Money. I took it, looked at it for a moment, then put it in my pocket. I wasn't paying her for her performance. She was paying me for mine. The realization hit me like a physical blow.
I hadn't been an innocent victim manipulated into helping someone I thought was being attacked. I had been a hired accomplice, paid to assault Craig Vaughn as part of Melissa's insurance fraud scheme. But that didn't make sense either. I had no memory of agreeing to hurt anyone for money. I had no memory of even meeting Melissa before that night in the alley. If I had been a willing participant from the beginning, why couldn't I remember any of it? I rewound the footage and watched it again, this time focusing not on the money exchange, but on my behavior throughout the incident. Something about my movements, my reactions, looked wrong. I was moving too slowly. My responses seemed delayed, almost sluggish. Then I noticed something else. Before the confrontation with Vaughn began, there was a brief moment where Melissa and I were standing close together. She appeared to hand me something else, something small, which I put in my mouth. At the time, I'd assumed it was gum or a mint. But watching it now, with everything I knew about her capacity for manipulation and deception, I began to suspect it was something else entirely. I called my lawyer immediately. "I need you to request a copy of the toxicology report from the night I was arrested." "David, you weren't arrested that night. You gave a voluntary statement and went home." "Then I need you to find out if the hospital ran any blood tests on me when the paramedics checked me over." "Why? What are you thinking?" "I think I was drugged. I think Melissa gave me something that night that affected my memory and my judgment. That's why I can't remember giving her money, and that's why my behavior in the security footage looks so strange." There was a pause while my lawyer considered this.
That's actually not impossible. Date rape drugs like Rohypnol or GHB can cause short-term memory loss and reduce inhibitions. If she gave you something like that, it would explain why you agreed to things you wouldn't normally agree to. Can you find out if I was tested for anything like that? I'll make some calls. While I waited to hear back from my lawyer, I went through the rest of the evidence files more carefully. There were photographs from the crime scene, witness statements, medical records for Craig Vaughn's injuries, and detailed reports from the investigating officers. But there was also something I hadn't expected to find: a psychiatric evaluation of Melissa that had been conducted as part of her victim impact statement for Vaughn's trial. The evaluation painted a picture of a woman who had suffered severe psychological trauma from the assault. According to the report, Melissa exhibited classic symptoms of PTSD, including nightmares, flashbacks, anxiety attacks, and an inability to be alone or to trust men. Reading those pages was like being punched in the stomach over and over again. For 8 months, I had seen those exact symptoms in Melissa. The nightmares that woke her up screaming, the way she would sometimes freeze up when we were intimate, lost in some internal terror, the panic attacks that would come out of nowhere, leaving her shaking and crying. I had held her through those episodes. I had comforted her, reassured her, tried to help her heal from the trauma of what I thought Vaughn had done to her. I had felt guilty for not arriving in that alley sooner, for not preventing her from being hurt in the first place. Now I realized it had all been an act, a performance designed to maintain the fiction that she was an innocent victim and to keep me emotionally invested in protecting her. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. She had manipulated my natural compassion, my desire to help someone I loved recover from trauma. Every time I held her during a nightmare, every time I talked her through a panic attack, I was actually helping her maintain the lie that was destroying Craig Vaughn's life and setting me up to take the fall for her crimes. My lawyer called back that evening. "Good news and bad news," he said. "The good news is that the hospital did run a basic tox screen on you that night, since you'd been in a fight. The bad news is that they only tested for alcohol and common recreational drugs. They wouldn't have detected something like Rohypnol unless they were specifically looking for it." "So we can't prove I was drugged?" "Not definitively, no. But the fact that you had no alcohol or drugs in your system that night actually supports your story that you were acting out of character. And the security footage does show Melissa giving you something before the altercation with Vaughn." "What about the witness who came forward, the retired police officer who supposedly saw the whole thing?" "That's where things get interesting. I've been trying to contact him to get his statement, but nobody seems to know how to reach him. The police say he came forward voluntarily, gave his statement, and then left. They don't have a current address or phone number for him. That's convenient. Very convenient. Almost like he doesn't exist, or like someone paid him to give a statement and then disappear. The pieces were starting to come together, but they painted a picture that was even more disturbing than what I'd originally believed. Melissa hadn't just manipulated me into participating in insurance fraud. She drugged me to ensure my compliance, then used a fake witness to provide corroborating evidence that I was a willing participant.
There's something else, my lawyer continued. I did some digging into Melissa's background beyond what the police found. She's been using different names and identities for years. The insurance policy she took out, it was under the name Melissa Hartwell, but before that she was Sarah Collins in Nevada, Jennifer Martinez in Arizona, and Rebecca Thompson in Colorado. What was she doing in those other states? Similar cons, it looks like. She'd establish a relationship with a man, usually someone isolated and vulnerable, then manipulate him into participating in some kind of fraud scheme. Insurance fraud, fake injury claims, identity theft. When the scheme played out, she'd disappear and leave her accomplice to face the consequences. I thought about the photograph Detective Chen had shown me, Melissa sitting at that cafe in Cabo San Lucas with another man. Was he her next victim? Was she already working on setting up her next con? How many men has she done this to? At least 4 that I can document, probably more. You're part of a pattern, David. She's a professional con artist who specializes in targeting decent, lonely men and turning them into unwitting accomplices. But the other men, did they go to prison? Most of them, yes. Rebecca Thompson's boyfriend in Colorado is serving 12 years for insurance fraud. Jennifer Martinez's partner in Arizona got 15 years for identity theft. Sarah Collins disappeared before her scheme in Nevada fully played out, but the man she was involved with killed himself rather than face prosecution. The weight of that information was crushing. I wasn't just facing prison time for crimes I barely understood. I was part of a pattern of destruction that had been going on for years. Melissa had ruined multiple lives, driven at least one man to suicide, and she was still out there, still finding new victims. What are my options? I asked. Limited, my lawyer admitted. The physical evidence is pretty damning, even if we can raise questions about how it was obtained. The best we can probably hope for is a plea deal that gets you a reduced sentence in exchange for cooperation in building a case against Melissa. How reduced? Maybe 8 to 10 years instead of 20. Still a significant portion of your life, but better than the alternative. 8 to 10 years in prison for being drugged and manipulated by a woman I tried to love. 8 to 10 years while she lived freely on whatever money she'd stolen from her insurance fraud.
8 to 10 years of my life gone because I'd been too trusting, too lonely, too eager to believe that someone like her could actually care about someone like me. That night, I sat in the empty apartment and tried to figure out what to do. I could take the plea deal, serve my time, and hope that someday Melissa would be caught and brought to justice. Or I could fight the charges, risk getting the full 20-year sentence, but at least go down swinging. There was a third option, one I didn't want to think about but couldn't ignore. The same option that Rebecca Thompson's boyfriend in Colorado had chosen when he realized his life was over. I understood now why he'd made that choice. The isolation, the betrayal, the realization that everything you thought you knew about yourself and your life was a lie. It was almost too much to bear. But as I sat there in the darkness, surrounded by the expensive furniture that had never really been mine, I thought about Craig Vaughn. Whatever had been done to me, whatever manipulations I'd fallen victim to, he was the real victim here. A man trying to do his job who had ended up with permanent brain damage because I'd been too easily manipulated. I owed it to him to fight, not just for my own freedom, but to make sure that what had been done to both of us was exposed and punished. The next morning, I called my lawyer and told him I wanted to fight the charges. David, I have to advise you that this is probably not the best strategy. The evidence against you is strong, and without Melissa here to testify about what really happened, we're going to have a hard time proving your innocence. I know, but I can't plead guilty to something I didn't do, even if I can't prove I didn't do it. All right, if that's what you want, we'll fight. But we need to be strategic about this. We need to find evidence that supports your version of events, or at least raises reasonable doubt about the prosecution's case. Over the next few weeks, we worked on building a defense. We hired a private investigator to try to track down information about Melissa's other cons, hoping to establish a pattern of behavior that would support my claim that I'd been manipulated. We consulted with experts on date rape drugs to explain how my behavior that night was consistent with being drugged. We even hired a video analyst to examine the security footage and confirm that it showed Melissa giving me money, not the other way around. But we kept running into dead ends.
Melissa's other victims were either in prison or unwilling to talk. The retired police officer who had supposedly witnessed the assault couldn't be located. Physical evidence from that night had been lost or destroyed. Most frustrating of all, we couldn't find any trace of Melissa herself. She had disappeared completely, leaving no credit card records, no phone calls, no digital footprint of any kind. It was as if she had simply vanished from the face of the earth. 3 months before my trial was scheduled to begin, we got a break. My private investigator called with news that changed everything. "David, I found her." "Found who? Melissa?" "Better than that. I found the witness, the retired police officer who supposedly saw you assault Craig Vaughn." My heart started pounding. "Where is he?" "Las Vegas, and David, he's ready to talk." It turns out Melissa paid him $5,000 to give false testimony about what he saw that night. He's been carrying around the guilt ever since he found out that Craig Vaughn was permanently disabled. He'll testify? He'll do more than testify. He has records of the payment Melissa made to him, including copies of the fake identification she used to set up the bank transfer. And he has information about where she might be hiding. For the first time in months, I felt something like hope. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in another interrogation room, but this time I wasn't the one being questioned. Detective Chen and ADA Hoffman were interviewing Walter Morrison, the retired police officer who had lied about witnessing my assault on Craig Vaughn. "She contacted me through an old friend," Morrison was saying, "said she needed someone to back up her story about being attacked, that her ex-husband was trying to destroy her credibility in their divorce case. She offered me $5,000 just to say I'd seen what happened in the alley." "And you didn't think this was suspicious?" Detective Chen asked. Morrison looked ashamed. "I needed the money. My wife had been battling cancer for 2 years, and the medical bills were crushing us. $5,000 seemed like a lifeline." "What exactly did she ask you to say?" "That I'd seen David attack the private investigator unprovoked, and that I'd seen money change hands between David and Melissa afterward. She coached me on all the details, made sure my story would match the security footage." ADA Hoffman leaned forward. "Did she tell you why she needed you to lie about David's involvement?" "She said David was her partner in some kind of con game, and that if he got caught, he'd implicate her too.
She wanted to make sure he looked like the primary perpetrator so she could claim to be just another victim. The betrayal was even deeper than I'd realized. Not only had Melissa drugged and manipulated me into assaulting Craig Vaughn, she then set me up to take the fall for the entire scheme while positioning herself as an innocent victim." "Did she say anything about other similar schemes?" Detective Chen asked. Morrison nodded. "She bragged about it, said she'd been running cons like this for years, always finding some lonely guy to be her fall guy. She said men were easy to manipulate if you knew which buttons to push." After Morrison finished his statement, Detective Chen turned to me. "David, based on this new evidence, we're dropping all charges against you. And we're issuing a federal warrant for Melissa's arrest on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice." I should have felt relieved, but all I felt was empty. My name might be cleared, but Craig Vaughn was still permanently disabled. The 8 months I'd spent believing I was in love were still a lie. The trust I'd had in my own judgment, in my ability to read people and situations, was still shattered. "There's more," Morrison said, looking at me directly. "Melissa is in Costa Rica, living under the name Patricia Walsh. She's been there for 6 months, and according to my contact, she's already working on her next mark, some American businessman who thinks he's found the love of his life. 3 months later, I was sitting in a courtroom in San Jose, Costa Rica, watching as Melissa Hartwell, or Patricia Walsh, or whatever her real name was extradited back to the United States to face federal charges.
She looked different than I remembered. Her auburn hair was now blonde, cut in a shorter, more sophisticated style. She was wearing an expensive business suit that made her look like a successful executive rather than the vulnerable art gallery worker I'd fallen in love with. But when she saw me in the gallery, when our eyes met for the first time in over a year, I saw something I hadn't expected to see. For just a moment, her carefully constructed facade slipped, and I caught a glimpse of something that looked almost like regret. It lasted only a second before her expression hardened back into the cold, calculating look of a professional criminal. But that brief moment of vulnerability reminded me of the woman I thought I loved, the woman I'd comforted through nightmares and panic attacks that I now knew were completely fake. During her trial, the full scope of her crimes became clear. She had indeed been running similar cons for over a decade, targeting lonely, vulnerable men in cities across the country. The private investigator estimated she had stolen over $8 million through various fraud schemes, always leaving her accomplices to face the consequences while she moved on to the next victim. Craig Vaughn was there for the trial too. Seeing him was almost harder than seeing Melissa. He moved slowly, with the careful, deliberate movements of someone whose brain no longer processed information the way it used to. His wife held his arm to help him navigate the courtroom, and I could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the look of someone who had been caring for a disabled spouse for over a year. During a break in the proceedings, I approached them. "Mr. Vaughn," I said, "I'm David Chin. I'm responsible for what happened to you." He looked at me with eyes that seemed to have trouble focusing. "You're the one who hit me." "Yes, but I want you to know that I never intended to hurt you. I thought I was protecting someone. I had no idea you were innocent or that the whole thing was a setup." His wife, Janet, spoke up. "We know. We followed the case. We understand what really happened. You were as much a victim as Craig was. That doesn't change the fact that I'm the one who caused his injuries." Craig Vaughn studied my face for a long moment, and I could see him struggling to find the words he wanted to say. He said finally, "She fooled you too." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I can't hate you for that. She was very good at fooling people." Janet Vaughn reached out and touched my arm. "We're not angry at you, David.
We're angry at her for what she did to both of you." Their forgiveness was more than I deserved, and it broke something inside me that I hadn't realized was still holding together. I started crying right there in the courthouse hallway, sobbing like a child, while this woman, whose life had been destroyed because of my gullibility, comforted me. Melissa was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. The judge called her crimes a pattern of calculated cruelty that destroyed multiple lives for personal gain. She showed no remorse during the sentencing, no acknowledgement of the pain she had caused to her victims. As they led her away in handcuffs, she looked at me one more time. This time, there was no vulnerability in her expression, no hint of the woman I thought I loved. There was only cold contempt, as if I was personally responsible for her downfall rather than just another victim of her schemes. After the trial ended, I tried to rebuild my life. I moved back to Eugene, closer to my parents, and found work as a freelance software consultant. I went to therapy to try to process the trauma of being so completely manipulated and betrayed. I started slowly rebuilding the social connections I'd let atrophy during my relationship with Melissa. But trust doesn't come easily anymore. When I meet new people, especially women, I find myself analyzing their words and actions for signs of deception or manipulation. I second-guess my own instincts constantly, wondering if I'm being too paranoid or not paranoid enough. The hardest part is the loneliness. I'm afraid to open myself up to love again, afraid that my judgment is so fundamentally flawed that I'll just end up being used again. I date occasionally, but I always find reasons to end things before they get serious. The risk of being hurt like that again feels too great. Sometimes I wonder if that was Melissa's final victory, Not just stealing money or destroying lives, but making it impossible for her victims to trust or love again. 3 years have passed since that night in the alley, and I still think about it almost every day. Not about Melissa, but about the choice I made to run towards someone's scream for help instead of away from it. Despite everything that happened, despite all the pain and betrayal that followed, I don't regret that choice. I still believe that helping people who need help is the right thing to do, even when it's dangerous, even when you might be wrong about what's really happening. The alternative, walking past someone who might be in genuine trouble because you're afraid of being deceived, feels like letting Melissa win. But I'm more careful now. I trust, but I verify. I help, but I ask questions. I've learned that predators like Melissa count on good people's reluctance to seem suspicious or untrusting. They weaponize our desire to see the best in others. Craig Vaughn and I have stayed in touch. He's made some progress in his recovery, though he'll never be fully the same.
He's started a support group for victims of violent crimes, and he's asked me to speak at some of their meetings about recognizing and avoiding manipulation. It's hard to talk about it, but I do it because I think it's important for people to understand how sophisticated these cons can be. Melissa didn't just lie to me about who she was. She created an entire false reality, complete with fake documentation, paid witnesses, and carefully crafted psychological profiles of her targets. The scary thing is how easy it was for her to do. In our connected digital world, it's surprisingly simple to create false identities, fake histories, and convincing documentation of almost anything you want people to believe. And people like me, decent, trusting people who want to see the good in others, are particularly vulnerable to these kinds of sophisticated manipulations. I've learned that love and trust have to be earned over time, through consistent actions and transparency. Real love doesn't ask you to ignore red flags or stop asking questions. Real love doesn't require you to throw away your own belongings, your own friends, your own identity. Most importantly, I've learned that being a good person doesn't mean being a naive person. You can be kind and compassionate and willing to help others without making yourself vulnerable to predators who see kindness as weakness to be exploited. The night that changed everything taught me that there are people in this world who view other human beings not as individuals worthy of respect and care, but as resources to be harvested. They study us, catalog our weaknesses, and exploit our best impulses for their own gain. But it also taught me that most people aren't like that. Most people, even when they're struggling with their own problems, are capable of genuine compassion and forgiveness. The Vaughns who forgave me even though I was the one who destroyed their lives. Detective Chan, who treated me with respect and kindness even when she thought I might be a criminal. My lawyer, who fought for me even when the case seemed hopeless. Walter Morrison, the retired police officer who chose to come forward and tell the truth even though it meant admitting to his own crimes. He didn't have to do that. He could have kept quiet and let me go to prison for something I didn't fully understand I was doing. But he chose to do the right thing, even when it was hard. Those are the people who give me hope that I might be able to trust again someday, that I might be able to love again without constantly looking over my shoulder for signs of deception. I don't know if I'll ever completely get over what Melissa did to me. The scars from that level of betrayal run deep, and they change the way you see the world and your place in it. But I'm trying to heal, trying to rebuild, trying to find a way to be open to genuine connection without making myself vulnerable to predators. It's a delicate balance, one I'm still learning to navigate. But I have to believe it's possible, because the alternative, living in complete isolation and mistrust, isn't really living at all. 3 years later, I'm still here. I'm still trying to be a good person, still trying to help others when I can, still trying to see the best in people while being realistic about the worst. I'm still learning to trust my own judgment again, to believe that I can love someone without losing myself completely. It's not the life I thought I'd have when I walked down that alley 3 years ago, but it's mine. And maybe, someday, it'll be enough. If you've made it this far, I'd love to hear from you what moment in your life made you see someone for who they truly were. Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to Reddit Whispers, where the real stories get told.